sounded. It's even worse than when the seals were opened. And later on, we're going to see 7 bowls, the contents poured out on the earth. And that's even worse. So we had the seals, they were bad. We're going to get the trumpets, they're worse. We're going to get the bowls, that final judgment on the earth, which is just even worse. Oh, hello, Grace. Just realized Grace is here. Okay. So looking at chapter 8, then verse 2, then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. So what do we see trumpets used for? Announcements. Yeah. Anything else?
Warning.
Warning. Yeah, that's great.
Grab your attention.
Grab your attention. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say sound alarm. I think it's the same as what song I'll say.
Yeah.
Celebration.
Celebration. Yeah. Sorry, Ken, I missed that one. Yeah. Yeah. So
to herald something.
Yeah. Calls to worship, warnings, celebrations, alarms. They're also used to actually get God's people moving, aren't they? When Israel is actually wandering in the wilderness, they know they've got to move when they hear the trumpet sound, and then they've got to move on. Yeah. So we get these trumpets that are sounded. So we see God's people living under the rule of a hostile foreign power in the Exodus. They were captive in Egypt and needed to be rescued. Here in Revelation, the Christians are being terribly persecuted by the Roman Empire. They are captive and need to be rescued again. So in what ways would we, if at all, identify with that idea of being captive by a foreign power, living under the rule of a hostile foreign power? Do we identify with that at all in our lives today?
In Singapore, we don't. But in China, I realized there is.
Okay.
For Christians.
Yeah. Do you know what? I find that really interesting, because I'm going to be a little bit naughty with that. I think in Singapore you do. I think that if you went down stood on the platform of Raffles MRT station, and you started to pray for somebody to expel a demon from them, I think you would be in an awful lot of trouble at that point. I think you would have 4. They always go, why are they 4? They're policemen in Singapore, you know, they're armed to the teeth and they walk around in 4s. I think you'd have 4 policemen pounce on you pretty quickly, to be honest. I think that's just my own personal view. I just to, you know, challenge a little bit on that. But yeah, China, yes. Any other thoughts on this? Are there ways that we identify with living under a foreign hostile power? Does that relate to us? Any other ways that would relate to us? As I say, if at all.
I think we are incredibly blessed here in Singapore and in the UK and many other places in the West and the East. We can look out and see peoples being oppressed by foreign powers. We can see it happening, and I think we're very blessed that it doesn't happen yet to us. That's, you know, I can't imagine. I think I can imagine, but I don't think I really can imagine what it would be like to have my freedoms taken away from me, to really be stopped from worshipping, stopped from living my Christian life as I would like to live it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We actually had somebody come and visit our church back in the UK, and he was actually living in Saudi Arabia. And so for church there, what they need to do is they meet in a building that is completely soundproofed, so that no sound escapes that building, and it just looks like a bungalow. So from the outside, it just looks like a family home. And this is because if the Saudi authorities realized that they were meeting as a church in that building, they would be in big, big trouble. I mean, really big trouble, especially if the Saudi authorities thought that they were actually what they call proselytizing, if they were trying to win souls for Christ in that country. I don't know if you know about Saudi Arabia, but basically what they do, if they want to execute people, they will just close off a car park, put somebody in the middle, somebody with a big sword just comes along and chops off your head. And actually, a Christian who witnesses for Jesus in that country, they would be at risk of being executed. Yeah. I find it, I find it a real challenge that actually we live, as Carol says, we live such comfortable lives. I would say, just thinking about Singapore, just to go back to my original point on this, in the UK, we have a ministry called Healing on the Streets. I don't know if you've heard of this. So what you do, we were part of this, and it was amazing, actually. So you just put a banner on the side of the street. Would you like us to pray for you to be healed? And we usually have a team of maybe 3-4 people and a chair. And if somebody's walking along, we just speak to them and say, would you like to, is there anything you would like us to pray for you today? If so, why don't you sit in the chair and we'll pray for you? And we've seen people healed. And I wonder if you would actually be allowed to do that in many other countries. I wonder how that would go down. In the UK, we've got a bit more freedom than many other countries. So, for example, I think here, I wouldn't see that happening here, for example. So, yeah, it's when you try and behave like a Christian that actually when you break surface and start being like Jesus out there in the community, that you actually then encounter problems. But if you stay under the radar, I think we can live pretty comfortable lives. Yeah. Anyway, that's just a thought. Okay, all right. Moving on. Just a couple of verses I'm going to read for you. This is from Isaiah 27. In that day being the last day, in that day the great trumpet will sound. Many who were dying in exile in Assyria and Egypt will return to Jerusalem to worship the Lord on his holy mountain. So in Isaiah, we see that last trumpet, or that great trumpet sounding in the last day, being a sound of hope, actually, for believers. Matthew 24, and he will send out his angels with the mighty blast of a trumpet, and they will gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth and heaven. So again, this trumpet sounding in the last days is a sound of hope for God's people. Okay, verse 3. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. So you see in the Old Testament, this censer was just, it represents a way of just visualizing prayers being made to God. Personally, I don't really see too much significance in actually the incense and the smoke. What I do see the significance of here, it's the prayers of the saints. And those prayers of the saints are actually reaching God's throne. That's the point of this verse. Verse 4 says, and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Okay. So verse 6, beg your pardon, verse 5. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Verse 6, now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. So verse 7, the first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood. And these were thrown upon the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and of the third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. All right. So what we now need to do is just pause a second and go back to Exodus. So, oh, beg your pardon, just knocked the computer. So we go back to Exodus, and we're going to pick up in Exodus. This is chapter 9, if I can get there. Okay, so going back to Exodus chapter 9. And we'll just read a little bit from chapter 9. So this is picking up in verse 13. Then the Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning and present yourself before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues on you yourself and on your servants and your people, so that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. For by now I could have put out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But for this purpose I have raised you up, to show you my power, so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. You are still exalting yourself against my people and will not let them go. Behold, about this time tomorrow, I will cause a very heavy hail to fall, such as has never been in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. So just to make the point that some of these things that we're seeing do have quite a clear parallel in that Exodus when Israel was rescued from Egypt. And of course, you have the blood as well, because the waters were turned to blood. Okay. So a third of the earth was burned up. Now, when we go back, chapter 6, when the 4th seal was opened, we see a quarter of the earth was affected. So we're moving on from quarters to thirds. Things are getting a bit more intense. As we move on, judgment increases. God's judgment is not yet complete here. So the first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. So just to pause there and ask a question, when you read this verse, can you relate any of that to what you're seeing in the world today? When you read that description, does any of that ring true with you for what's happening in our world today?
Yeah, the yearly haze in our Singapore, or the forest burning.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? That actually there are some bits and pieces here. You look at deforestation in the world in our lifetime. It's astonishing the amount of trees that have been burned up to make way for farmland, or have been burned up and ploughed up to make way for palm oil or palm plantations where they get the oil from. It's absolutely astonishing, or to make way for places for people to live. You look at global warming. Singapore apparently is getting warmer more quickly than most other places on the planet. It's actually, I don't know, some of you who are long-term Singapore residents, does it feel warmer today than it did 30 years ago?
Yep.
Yeah.
Very
It does feel so.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right then. Move on. Verse 8, the second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. And you see that in Exodus chapter 7, it is where you see the water becoming blood. So a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. All right. So what happened in Rome in AD 79? So about maybe 10 years before this revelation was written, something happened in Rome, AD 79.
Pompeii? Okay. Was it Pompeii?
Yeah, Vesuvius.
Vesuvius.
Yeah, we saw this incredible volcano erupt in amazing fashion. And we have got these amazing descriptions by Pliny, who he actually wrote in great detail what actually happened from what he saw. And for hundreds of years, people doubted that his account was real. But now with modern volcanology, which is a great science, I think, they actually realized that what he said, his description was completely accurate. So has anybody seen a volcano erupting? Hands up. Hands up if you've seen a volcano
In
erupt.
photos,
Sorry?
in the pictures, in video. Not real.
Not
Saw
real.
the New Zealand,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
New Zealand volcano that exploded. That
Yeah.
was recorded by video. That was
Yeah. Yeah. So seeing a volcano erupt, my goodness me, I've got to admit, I would like to see that. But actually, you think about these guys here, is very recent history for them, that in Rome, we have had this amazing eruption. Okay. So what are we going to say? So Psalm 78 verse 44 says this: for he turned their rivers into blood, so no one could drink from their streams. Okay. All right. So verse 9, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So we're getting this third, we're increasing from a quarter to a third. Verse 10, the third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. So this great star falling from heaven. Any idea what that could be? What's your best guess on a great star falling from heaven?
a meteorite hitting the earth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's only in very recent times that we've actually realized that that was a possibility. Is within our, apologies, some of us are really quite old. You know, I'm talking for the old people. Okay, in our lifetimes, the idea that a meteorite could hit the Earth and cause damage, this is only a really, really recent thing. Up until sort of the 1960s, okay, they have this amazing crater in America. I think it's in California. And for up until the 1960s, it was believed to have been created by an underground steam explosion. And a geologist actually looked at it and said, actually, do you know what? This wasn't caused by steam, this was caused by a meteorite. And he completely changed the mindset of geology that actually, yes, we can see that meteorites have hit the Earth. Could God bring judgment that way? Of course he could. Of course he could. Okay, moving on from that happy thought. Verse 11. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. So how many of you remember Chernobyl? Do you remember Chernobyl?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So many Christians got excited by this because if you twist the words hard enough, Chernobyl could possibly mean wormwood. It could mean bitterness. So, was this one of the trumpet sounds in Revelation being worked out in our time with Chernobyl? Not sure about that one. So,
Well, there's a more recent one in Fukushima.
Fukushima.
Where it impacted the seas.
Yeah. So what does the name mean? Don't know. We need Yukio, don't we, to tell us what that name means. Okay. Yes. So Amos chapter 5, verse 7. O you who turn justice to wormwood and cast down righteousness to the earth. So wormwood is a plant with a strong and bitter tastes, and it represents calamity and sorrow. And we don't need any more calamity, I don't think, in our lives, do we? Here, water is made bitter. So what's happening here is that the water is being made bitter. So I'm going to take you back to Exodus, and this is Exodus chapter 15. Exodus chapter 15, I'm going to pick up in verse 22. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. So what we're actually seeing here is a reversal of that. But reading on, there the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and he tested them, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do that which is right in his eyes and give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Which is a nice thing to take out of that little kind of expedition into Exodus. I am the Lord your healer, Jehovah Rapha, a name God calls himself. I am the Lord who heals you. Okay. So verse 12 says this: the fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened. and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. Just pause there for a second. So the fourth angel blew his trumpet, fourth, all right, important. And a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars. So what did God make on the fourth day?
Fourth day.
It's in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, if you want to cheat and look it up.
Must be the sun or the moon or the day and night.
The sun, the moon, and the stars. So I'm just thrilled by the way that this all ties together, that the Bible is a complete unity, that we see right at the beginning on the fourth day that God made the sun, the moon, and the stars. And here we have the fourth trumpet being blown. And we're seeing a third of the sun, a third of the moon, a third of the stars being made dark. Not that that's a good thing to happen, but I like the way it ties together.
Does it sound like an eclipse?
An eclipse, yeah.
Yeah, it could be, couldn't it? It could be. Yeah, yeah. We had an eclipse in the UK where Karen and I live, and it was cloudy. Nobody saw anything. It got a bit dark, and then it got a bit lighter. But that's the UK, always cloudy. There we are.
But I have difficulty trying to understand what you mean by 1/3
Yeah.
of the sun and moon.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestion of how we understand it?
No. No, not at all. No. Actually, I'm making a serious point here because actually a lot of this is really symbolic. It is very, very difficult to understand. And what I would say to you, it's very difficult to be dogmatic about it as well. It is a vision, and it's an incredible vision. And what do some of these things mean? You know, is it the case that some of this is a meteorite falling to Earth? Is it the case that it is an eclipse? It's very hard. It really is tough. I've deliberately held off on talking about tribulations and millenniums that we see at the beginning of Revelation chapter 20 and the timing of some of these events and our part in those. And we will get onto that. If we make it through to Revelation chapter 20, if we ever get that far, we will actually look at that. But this is all incredibly difficult to understand. It really is. So sorry, Tim, the short answer is no.
I understand. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Verse 13. And this, I have to say, this is my absolute favorite verse. I've been hanging on to wait to get to verse 13. All right. And then I looked and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead. Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blasts of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. All right. Okay. So Carol, in her translation, which is the New Living Translation, actually has terror, terror, terror. So we've got woe or terror. Does anybody else's translation have a different word for woe or terror?
Mine is woe.
Woe. Right. Okay. So apologies for what comes next. The Greek word that is translated woe or terror is O-U-A-I when you transliterate it. So it becomes O-U-A-I. All right. So I'm not sure if I can do this. I'm going to try. So it's
Very good, dear.
that was supposed to be the screech of an eagle. Okay.
Oh.
Ah, you understand. You understand what I did there. Okay. So actually, it's one of these. Sorry, it's an onomatopoeic word. It's supposed to sound like what it actually is. So it's supposed to be the screech of an eagle when you look at it in the Greek. I do apologize. That's probably the poorest eagle screech that you've ever heard in your life.
And it's been recorded.
And it's actually been recorded. That's great.
It's not bad. I
not
almost
bad.
hear.
It's not bad. Okay. All right. So, sorry, I've just lost the plot here for a second. So what it says in verse 13, then I looked and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead, woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, and the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. So when we look at, just going back to Revelation chapter 6 in verse 10, no need to turn, I'll read it to you. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Revelation chapter 9 verse 4 says this, "They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads." So we understand that those who have the seal, sorry, this is chapter 7, Tim and Patsy, which you missed last time, but those who belong to God have a seal, the mark of the cross on their forehead, this Hebrew letter, Tor, on their forehead. So when it says here, woe to those who dwell on the earth, it's not talking about woe to every single person on the earth. It's talking about woe to those who do not belong to God, who live on the earth. And we are those who bear the seal of God. And when we pray to God, he hears our prayers. So there's an awful lot of detail that we've covered. There's an awful lot of stuff. That's a theological term, stuff. There's an awful lot of stuff in here. But it's no good if we just read it and have a little bit of fun and listen to Peter trying to be an eagle and think that's funny. If we don't actually take something from this, if we don't learn something about God from this, if there's nothing we can take away that is actually going to lead us on into Christ-likeness, into continuing that journey to be more like Jesus. So what I'm going to do, we'll stop there, and this isn't compulsory, okay, but if there is something that you want to share that you're going to take away from this chapter today, if you want to share that'd be really great. So anybody want to share what their takeaway is from everything that we've sort of read through and listened to from chapter 8?
Peter, if I may just ask a request, make a request. We'll move around everyone, and if everyone does not have at all anything, we'll just say pass.
Yeah.
Is that all right with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, maybe I'll start since I've opened my mouth on it. Yeah, thank you again for this sharing. I took away that parallelism which are not seen with Exodus story, which I've recently been led to review again, and what God did in bringing deliverance from slavery and persecution, and how we have hope. And yet, when we think about it, and I think about what's happening too, sometimes I get a bit depressed about all that's happening. Even though, Carol will say, this is only the beginning, 1 quarter, now you're 1/3, But what's happening now is kind of a bit depressing in a sense, sometimes you look at it. And the suffering that's happening to lots of people, the economy, and the restrictions that's going on. And even then, we are not even getting the full brunt of it. I mean, in Singapore, we are hardly, and yet it's depressing. So the parallelism also gave me hope in the sense of the people of God had Goshen. they were spared from the plague. And I think there'll be grace given to the people of God even in the last days. Okay, sorry for a long takeaway. I'll try to be faster for rest.
No,
And then we can end with prayer after.
I did enjoy the parallelism of Genesis, fourth day, Exodus, with the plagues. So I'm just wondering what are all these parallelism for, except to say that, wow, know that it reminded me, when Moses went through his birth, he faced the greatest slaughter of his year and he survived. Jesus also faced the greatest slaughter during his birth and he survived. So now, whatever plagues we go through, if we face whatever slaughter and we survive, there is always a purpose. That's all I was thinking of.
Mhm. Yeah.
We just move on to other parts. To my left is, or to my right is Ken, and then we go Julie and somehow and Grace. Next.
Yeah, the actually the imagery in Revelation really grips me. It's just incredible. I mean, I'm here every week because I just don't want to miss Revelation. It just really grips me. And like last week, you were talking about the tour,
Yeah.
and it just struck me like, here now it's so widespread. Like every cat, every dog has a chip. They have a chip. We recognize our own pet because they have a chip. We recognize them. We know them. So imagine God knows us because we have that on us and he recognizes us. And that's just, so we have it. We have our identification. We carry it with us and he's already embedded it in us. So, yeah.
I think this all these visions of what's to happen really sounds like that is what the world is currently going through with the climate change, with what's happening in Israel. A lot of things are a bit unfathomable. It's very hard to understand it, why the Israelis or the Palestinians, they are at each other's throat and forever they are unable to solve their problems. It's very hard to understand it. I give up trying to understand it a long time ago. So I just check out the word Chernobyl as well, and that's true. It's a Ukrainian word for a shrub that's very bitter. So yeah, interesting. So it looks like we would either have a nuclear holocaust, we'll have floods and famine and plague in the form of mutated COVID virus. So yeah, it's it's the end times, I guess. Scary.
Grace, we don't thank you.
Is that Grace? Who? Hi, Grace. But although she's listening in.
I have a takeaway, Grace.
Hi. Sorry, I lost my voice.
Oh. One takeaway.
I find the whole of the Revelations very scary.
Scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is. Yeah.
Yes. Carol and Peter, then for y'all to wrap up your
They
takeaway.
are not scared. They just dive into Revelations.
Revelation is a book that I, like you, Lee, I find quite fascinating and quite riveting to read. It's one of those books I have a little shelf in my head of things in the Bible that just blow my mind and I can't get to grips with. And most of Revelation sits on that shelf.
Yeah.
Except that when I read it and I can, parts of it when all the angels are saying glory, 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 all that sort of stuff, and the descriptive words of heaven in later on in the book, I can appreciate. But this bit I don't quite understand, except for tonight. And I was thinking with the 4 trumpets, the first 4 trumpets. So there are 3, I think, to come. And the notes in my Bible talk about the fact that Christians aren't going to be exempt from these first 3 trumpets. We will still be on the earth possibly on the earth, or suffering at the same time as everybody else on the earth. But in verse 13, it talks about all those who belong to this world, because of what will happen in the last 3 trumpets. And I keep saying to myself, just make sure which group you're in. Make sure you've got your salvation and your mark and your salvation firmly stapled to your heart, to your soul, that Jesus is died for you, and just make sure you're in that first group. I'm preaching to the converted, but it's one thing just to be thankful that we are saved, that we are in that group. But I guess on the flip side of that is we all know many, many, many people who will be in the second group, and that's going to be hard.
I think my takeaway from this is I don't actually know what's going to happen. I read this and I find it genuinely difficult to make sense of this. You can kind of get an inkling, I think. You get a bit of an inkle for what is going on, but I don't understand it. But I trust. And faith is faith when you don't understand. When you actually have to trust through the things that you don't understand, but you believe God anyway, because he is faithful. And that's my takeaway from this, is that actually it's very hard. I've looked at this quite extensively. And actually, the first time I studied through this, I thought I had a good handle on it. And that was a few years ago now. And I've come to it and I've read it again. I understand it less than I did 3 years ago when we talked through this last time. But I trust, and this is where I have my faith, that actually I don't understand what's going to happen. I don't understand what's going on, but I trust my God.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have a question. Does it matter whether we know whether we are on a 6th seal or we are on a prelude of the 7 trumpets? Does it matter?
Because it's going to happen anyway.
No.
I want to take up what Carol just mentioned about being in the right group. I think, yes, it's true, you need to be in the right group, but it's not a once and for all. We want to be saved as well. We want to be saved, and it means that we will, as God's people, will continue to have his grace and his peace in the midst of every situation. And I think that is the privilege of, it's not just a one thing, oh, I've said my sinner's prayer and that's it. I think, so what you mentioned about preaching to the converted, so it's not really true. It's encourage one another. I think that's good. Thank you. We have a few more minutes before we end for 9:15, and just want to ask anyone wants to have any issues to pray. We do pray for grace, for healing, as well as we want to pray for Carmen. Yes. What else?
I think we should pray for Singapore and the increased, the heightened